Okay. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody. Thanks for spending a little bit of time on your Friday morning with us. It feels like we've had several days of some really positive and productive protests and demonstrations, and so it gives us an opportunity to take this pause and spend some time with you and talk a little bit about this last weekend, and maybe try and answer some of the questions you have. I'd like to start by just saying I'm going to make a brief statement about kind of where we're at in the Eugene Police Department, what we're looking at, how we're looking into the future on how we want to analyze the events of this last week, the ideas that we have on how we can improve as an organization. But we are deeply embedded in taking a look at individual incidents that maybe are some cause for concern, not only for this community, but for our police department as well. And so there may be some questions you might ask that are going to be about specifics of things that we haven't even had a chance to really dive into and better understand the details. And so my commitment to you is that that's happening, and my further commitment to you is that as we get into those details, we'll be able to talk more freely and more openly and more informed about those things. And so I apologize if there's some questions that we can't answer right now, but I'm sure that from a higher level we'll be able to answer many of your questions, and I'm hoping to be able to do that. Before I get started, I thought I'd introduce myself. I'm Chief Skinner, Eugene Police Department. I've been here for about 2 years. Oregon is not new to me in policing, and this is entering my 30th year of policing. More than 22 of those are in the state of Oregon. With me, I just wanted to introduce my senior staff. This is my leadership team that helps me try to make the very best decisions we can when we're dealing with tough situations like what we've had this week, or any situations about how we move this police department forward. Captain Sean Adams comes to us from Salem Police Department. He's a recent captain. He's a captain in charge of investigations. Deputy Chief Stacy Jepson comes to us from Hillsborough Police Department, has been here a little bit over a year. Stacy and I have a long-standing history, professional history, and she is my Deputy Chief of Police here in the city of Eugene. Captain Eric Klinko has been here for almost 23 to 25 years, Eric, I believe, and he has a deep knowledge of the history of Eugene and has come up through the ranks and understands this community and this culture. Behind him is Director of Public Information, Melinda McLaughlin. She is the one that you know, and she's the face of EPD and one that you interface with. Captain Sherry Meisel, she's a captain over our Support Operations Division. She originally comes to us from the Detroit area, has been with us here in Eugene for over 5 years. And Director of Finance and Administration, Tim Shuck. Tim comes to us from the public sector with a deep background in finance and public sector management. And so I'm very proud of the team that we've built and just kind of the diversity within the team with respect to their experiences, which helps us make the very best decisions that we can when we're out serving this community. So thank you guys very much. Part of what I was hoping to communicate today is a very deep reaffirmation to police reform in the Eugene Police Department and police reform nationwide in our industry. I think we can be leaders in that. I think we can lead from the front when it comes to police reform. When we think about police reform, we think about identifying where we've made mistakes. We think about where we can have improvement. We think about where we have systems in place that are just not contemporary or maybe just flat out wrong. And we identify those things and we try and fix those things. I say reaffirmation because this organization has been on this path for many years. If you think about the systems that are in place in Eugene with respect to the police commission, the independent police auditor, the citizen review board, the city of Eugene and the Eugene Police Department is steps ahead of many of our contemporary peers. And so I want people to know that reform has happened for many years, but it is our commitment to continue to look critically at how we do things, how we behave, and to continue on that path for police reform. There's been a lot of discussion about, both locally and abroad, about the defunding or the divesting in police organizations or the public safety organizations. And what I would tell you is that if we are truly going to achieve 21st century policing, we can't do that simultaneously with divesting in police and public safety. Strategic investment in every business is important as we move forward, and it's no different in public safety. Divesting in police and defunding police means we take a huge step backwards and fall back to our roots and the core of our mission, which is just simply answering calls for service. When what a 21st century police department does is build trust and legitimacy by investing in programs and community and opportunities to connect with those people that we serve. It's probably not a mistake that the first pillar of 21st century policing is trust and legitimacy in our police. It's probably the hardest one to achieve, undoubted. And one of the first steps in doing that is recognizing the injustices my chosen profession has had throughout the past and the present on community members, and particularly community members of color. That's step number one. All of the other pillars support trust and legitimacy, but all the other pillars come with a commitment and a strategic investment both in personnel and finances and our community members to get us to where we need to be. It's my declaration that we are an accountable organization, that we have undergone steps already to start taking a look at incidents that have caused some concern with our community, some incidents that have caused some concern as we look critically at our behavior and our performance. And it's our ongoing commitment to slowly and methodically and with an established process that we know works, start to look at each and every one of those that are of concern. Part of that accountability mechanism is the independent police auditor. I don't think you'll find an agency our size or even larger, especially in the Pacific Northwest, that has the layers of accountability that we have. The independent police auditor is a critical piece of building trust and legitimacy in what we do. And we work very, very closely with them in making sure that we account for all behavioral, performance, and misconduct issues. At this point, I'd like to introduce Mark Gissner. He is our independent police auditor, and accompanying him today is Leah Pitcher, the deputy police auditor, and ask him to just step up and maybe say a few words about his role. Mark.
It's an honor and a privilege to be here and talk to the community about the things that have been going on and how we move forward. I wanted to let you know, because things are still in motion here, that we'll be looking at all the incidents that are involved. We are a structure of oversight under the city council, so I don't report to the executive branch, city manager, or to Chief Skinner. We are independent. We report directly to the mayor and city council, and the things that we do are ensure that there's fair and unbiased investigations. I have sole responsibility for classifying an event. For example, if there's an event that occurs, I decide whether it's an allegation of misconduct or a service complaint or a policy complaint or an incident review, and we look at it from there. We oversee the investigations of internal affairs. We make sure that we are satisfied with those investigations before it goes to the chief for final adjudication. We make adjudication recommendations to the chief. We do not have disciplinary power, and then we have a civilian review board, which in most instances reviews cases that we consider to be of importance to the community. It's a 7-member board that we have that looks at all the operations that we do. I think the chief makes a great point that we are a very vigorous organization. There are few in the nation that have that legislative link instead of the executive branch link, and we are I think few in the nation that are created by charter, so you can't get rid of us without the vote of city council or without the vote of the citizens, and there's requirements that we are adequately funded and staffed in a manner that we decide, not outsiders deciding. I would say, the toughest part for us in the 11 years that I've been here is there's 458 exemptions in the public records law of the state of Oregon. And I think at times that ties our hands in terms of communicating to the community, to the media, about some of the things that have happened here and some of the corrections that have been made. And we do put out an annual report, but I know that many of the things that are talked about include lack of information and transparency. And so that's probably the Achilles heel that we have to deal with in terms of our agency. Leah, have I missed some of the important things? Because I don't want to tie you guys up very long. Again, my boss is the mayor and city council.
I think, sorry, it's still awkward.
Yeah.
But I think the transparency piece is the most important thing. We've had multiple conversations with the chief over the last week about how to bring transparency to this process. I've been working in this job for 10 years. I've never seen this much response from the community about an incident or series of incidents. So we have a very involved population here in our city, and we've always known that. And I've seen a lot of evidence of that over the last week, and I'm impressed and happy to be a part of it. And I'm really hoping that our office in these investigations and going over what's been happening over the last week, that we can bring transparency and help bring trust to this community.
And I want to add, there's something out now, which I think is brilliant and easy to understand, is that 8 can't wait things with regard to policy. And I don't think there's a department anywhere in the nation in which we've strived to achieve those things. There's some things that need to be amended. And however, in terms of the level of transparency with regard to those 8 policies, and we've been very forceful because our review board is also on the police commission in advocating for those things. I think there's one that we've had discussions about getting rid of completely, that Keratoid holds. But in my 12 years, that has only been used once. And in its application, another officer was able to identify that the officer who was applying that was using it incorrectly and stopped it. So one of the important aspects of that 8 can't wait is officers reporting on other officers. And that occurs in this organization. Again, we can't publicize it and we can't identify people because of one of the exemptions or 2 of the exemptions in the public records law. But that occurs in this organization. There are officers that step forward and file complaints against other officers on contacts with members of the community. And I know that it takes courage to do that when you're in this type of organization, but that does occur, and that's one of the canons of that 8 can't wait movement.
As much as I talk about 21st century policing and especially that first pillar, it's probably not by accident that the second pillar is policy and oversight. You can't achieve the kind of legitimacy if you don't have the good policy and oversight, and I think Mark did a fantastic job of articulating the importance of the oversight. It was our intent, if you have not already seen, it's our intent to try and make available to you any policy you need to see around what governs the Eugene Police Department. Many of you may have gotten on the website and have downloaded those. If you haven't, we want to make sure that you have access to those so you can see what those are, and in case you have some questions about that. The other thing that comes up is making sure that we have the right individuals wearing this uniform that serve this community. I've talked often about what we saw in Minnesota with Mr. Floyd was not a training issue. It was not a misapplied technique. It wasn't a lack of training, in my estimation, based on what I saw. I believe it was a character issue. Part of what we try to do in the Eugene Police Department is recruit, select, and vet the best and the brightest to wear this uniform. And yes, we don't always get it right. With this many employees, we don't always get it right, but we certainly strive to do that. One of the hallmarks of that, and one of the foundational pieces of us making those good decisions, are the questions that we ask of these people that want to be a part of this profession that are character-based questions, and moving away from the stereotypical questions that engage in transactional leadership and ask questions around how they're going to relationally lead in this community. How are they going to problem solve? How are they going to remain creative in understanding our community and how we can serve them? And then maybe even more robustly is the background investigation that takes several weeks and a strong commitment by our organization that we actually travel to the hometown of the individual, or where the individual is originally is living at the time, and conducting those in-person interviews of not only the individual candidate, but family members, co-workers, neighbors, friends, so that we can get the best picture of the character and the human being that we're trying to hire. Those are expensive investigations to do. And those are investigations conducted by a variety of different individuals that have a vested interest in us wanting to hire the very best people to be a part of this team. And so it's an expensive investment, but again, strategic investment has to happen if we're going to be a 21st century police department. And then lastly, the very robust psychological evaluation that each one of these officers go to. We'll be providing a quote, if we haven't already, from our psychologist around the types of things she's looking for when it comes to being suitable for this profession. And we trust her implicitly to give recommendations on whether we have a candidate that should move forward or not. All of those systems are in place to make sure we field the very best team we can. And again, every once in a while, we miss that mark, no question. But I'm overwhelmingly impressed with the professionalism of the men and women of this organization, and overwhelmingly impressed that in light of all of the challenges we've had this week, all of the good things, all of the bad things, all of the things we've done well, and all of the mistakes that we've made, that they continue to show up every single day, exhausted and tired, ready to deal with whatever this community has for them. Because while we've been dealing with the last 5-6 days, we've also been trying to run a city of 170,000 people and 50 square miles and others that have needs. And so I'm very, very impressed that they continue to be committed and they show up every single day. That's why it's so important that one of the pillars of 21st century policing is officer wellness. Because one of the things that we have to pay attention to and that we need to invest in is making sure that we have good decision makers out there that we trust with this awesome authority to make good decisions. We have to pay attention to mental health, physical health, emotional health, spiritual health of each one of these individuals so we can make those good decisions. Police reform is having a renewed commitment to a lot of things, but we cannot step back from taking care of the men and women that are out there trying to build the trust and legitimacy. That would be a disservice to you, it'd be a disservice to this community, it'd be a disservice to the profession if we didn't have officer wellness as part of our consideration as we move forward. I'm going to open it up for questions. We also have a little bit of something different. There's been a lot of discussion around the tools that we've used this week. A lot of really good information, and in some cases some information that maybe is a little bit misguided or misunderstood. And so we want to provide you an opportunity, maybe not in a formal sense, but maybe after we're done with questions, to be able to take a look at, feel, touch the types of munitions, whether it be the gas munitions that we use, or the extended range impact munitions that we use, or the pepper ball munitions that we've used, which are very much like paintball, if that's something that you're familiar with. We want to open that up, an opportunity for that. We want to demystify the tools that we use to try and gain control of difficult situations. And so that will be offered at the end of this. So at this point, I'm going to take a step back. We have a variety of people here. There's subject matter experts that you can get with one-on-one if you want, and if they're comfortable. I'll try to answer the majority of the questions, but I may be relying on a couple of individuals to be able to fill in the blanks. So again, I apologize in advance if I can't answer all of the really detailed questions. As Mark alluded to, we have a long process ahead of us for us to be able to take a critical look at each one of those isolated incidents that we have. So,
well, Chief, on that point, I mean, in your understanding, has every use of those non-lethal and chemical deterrents been appropriate?
We don't know we won't be able to answer that until we have a chance to fully investigate that. Part of that investigation is being able to fully understand the context before the deployment of those. We certainly, obviously, like you, have seen plenty of video about during that moment in time, and I understand that that's a cause for concern for some, but I think in the greater context, it's important to do that. And before we render a final decision, like I said earlier, we have a fairly detailed process that we have to go through before we get to a place where we can say justified or unjustified, and whether or not there's any accountability and what levels of accountability are attached to that. We'd be doing ourselves a disservice to rush to judgment, because the process is where we really, really want to make sure that we are paying attention to. Mark, did you have any comments about
we'll
that?
be involved in that process as well. I think one of the things he did not mention is there's a lot of body-worn video there for every night that's going to have to be reviewed. And so that's going to take a little bit of time. They're still in operational status, so it's difficult for them to get all those downloaded onto the servers and everything, and for that to be extracted. But that's certainly going to be an important part of the equation as well.
Whose responsibility is it to allow for the deployment of such non-lethal and chemical munitions?
It's a combination of decision making in the field that's communicated up through the chain of command to a command post, for a lack of a better word, where we're trying to balance what's happening in the field and what the needs are around the entire situation that's happening. And so ultimately, that's a recommendation that's made based on what officers are seeing in the field, what they're seeing, what they're feeling, what they've experienced, who they've experienced multiple times, the tone and tenor of the level of violence potentially or not, and then ultimately that decision is made up through the chain of command.
Understanding there's going to have to be investigations for several of these things, but due respect, where's the ambiguity when the action Sunday night at firing at a reporter, when the city order specifically outlines that a reporter is exempt?
Well, that's certainly going to be one of the focal points of an investigation. We've been made aware of that, like everybody has, and we know that's. And I don't know if we officially have that classified yet or listed, but we're going to be taking a look at that as well.
We do have it. It's officially classified.
Okay.
It was live streamed to 2,000 people, and so we got a few phone calls about that and things like that. So I think that those events that occurred Sunday evening have already been isolated as something that's going to be taken as a deep dive, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, that moment in time, and I had a chance to talk with Henry and talk to him a little bit about that, and personally apologize for that. That incident should have never happened. There's no question about that. That incident should have never occurred the way it occurred. Part of what we need to better understand is have an opportunity to talk to the officer that actually deployed the canister of gas. All of the gas that we deploy is hand tossed. It's not fired at people. It's not launched out of a weapon system with any kind of charge. It's hand tossed. And part of really understanding the complementary piece to what we saw on video is actually having an interview with the officer to figure out what the officer's intent was, because I think that's important here. If there was any malicious intent there.
If another agent of the state did the same thing to a reporter, do you not personally view that as a First Amendment violation?
Well, what I would tell you is that I think that it's important for us to understand the full context before we rush to judgment on whether there was a constitutional violation there. So that's my commitment, is that if that is a constitutional violation, it'll be classified as such, and we'll conduct a thorough and intense investigation to determine that.
While you've created the protocol now for these passes, if I may demonstrate.
For these what? I'm
for
sorry.
these passes, for these credentials, for these pieces of
Oh,
paper
passes.
you've
Okay.
provided
Thank you,
for
sir.
us.
Yeah.
If I may, I have a grave concern professionally here.
Okay.
It's dark. Folks are obviously agitated, tired, as you've mentioned. I, personally, also a CHL license holder, am reaching. Press, and I'm reaching. Does that not leave me susceptible, or any of us susceptible?
I think it leaves our entire community susceptible when we have a situation as violent as we saw Friday night, especially as it kind of de-escalated through the weekend, and that we've had several days of nothing but exemplary performance by our protesters and demonstrators. I think it leaves everybody susceptible, and it's something that's not only that we deal with at this moment in time, dealing with these protests, but these officers deal with every single day in dealing with our community when somebody that we're approaching is reaching for under their coat, in their back pocket. And what I would tell you is that we on every occasion, if possible, try to, with due caution, not rush to judgment about what an individual is reaching for. And so I would say as we move forward, we try to set a system up that readily recognizes our members of the free press inside those curfew areas. Quite frankly, we have had several nights of no curfew where we've had to have that as an issue. But I think there's some systems we can put in place that creates a level of safety not only for members of the press and the community, but also for law enforcement professionals.
There was video taken Saturday night by a private citizen reporting to show a drone overhead. Personally, Sunday and Monday night, I believe I heard one. Has the Eugene Police Department utilized the drone?
We have 100% utilized our drone to be able to monitor from several hundred feet the direction of the crowd, so that we can mostly be able to provide for some levels of safety. You've seen police officers on the ground trying to block off streets, our motors officers trying to block off streets, but we're mindful of incidents we've seen happen nationwide where people with ill intent have driven vehicles into protesters. And being able to see that from that literal several 100-foot view gives us a good sense of where we need to block off streets, the direction of the protesters, so that we can account for some safety mechanisms there as well. There's been no individual drone movement, to my knowledge, that has done anything other than be able to take and capture a larger picture of what's going on with these movements for their safety.
Speaking of the events that happened where curfew was enacted, do you believe that there was ample time between the curfew being announced and it being enforced? Do you think people were given warning before action was taken, whether that be arrest or these methods of dispersing them?
What I will tell you is that hindsight makes us all really, really smart. And in hindsight, the answer to your question is no. We could have been a little more thoughtful about the timing of the curfew on Sunday night. There's no question about that. We'll own that. That's one of those opportunities for us to look at how we decided to put a strategy in place to keep this community safe. And it was not done in a timely fashion to allow for some of the compliance that we needed. And so that's one of the pieces when we think about debriefing this. And again, I have to remind you, we're in 2 declarations of emergency right now. We're still in a pandemic declaration of emergency, and we're still under a declaration based on Friday's actions. And each night we have staff that are still having to be mindful of the ongoing protests that are undoubtedly going to occur. And so when we get a chance to step back from all of that and debrief that, that'll be a focal point of lessons learned and what we should have done differently, I'm sure.
Since Sunday night. Then is Sunday night and other nights that there have been a large police presence, is it just EPD or what other agencies have been helping you guys out?
It's just EPD. And I think it's a matter of perspective when we say a large police presence. We have slowly and methodically scaled down our police presence that is commensurate with the type of behavior we're seeing of our protesters and those that want to be heard. And so I'm pleased with the direction we're going. I'm pleased with the behavior I'm seeing. I'm pleased with the way our office has tried to be thoughtful about the resources that we put out there and to not be overly seen, to allow some space for people to be able to be heard throughout our community.
Since Sunday, has there been any more assessments and changes in how the EPD works with journalists in the field?
I do believe that we've had some systems in place since then. I'm not going to be able to speak to the details of that. Melinda could come up and speak to that if she would like to do that. But I think that's maybe an important piece to talk about, because we certainly want to make sure we ensure safety of everybody that's involved. Melinda?
Yes, it's really difficult when it's nighttime to be able to identify everybody. And so what we've done is we've asked for media who want to be within the curfew zone to go ahead and send us their picture and description, and we've provided that to the watch commander. In addition, we're making sure they wear a plaque, and it's created by the City of Eugene, and we want them to wear that visibly. We've also asked them to wear any logo gear that they have, if they're in a vehicle, to have it be marked. And then I've been working with the City of Eugene City Manager's PIO to see if perhaps we can purchase some vests that are reflective, and that would be really indicative of if somebody's a media or not.
Linda, how are we supposed to wear this?
I would say it'd be a really good idea to laminate it and hole punch
An
it.
8.5 by 11 sheet of paper I'm supposed to wear?
I think if you laminate it and put some holes in it would be great, and if you have some feedback for us, we're more than willing to take the feedback and create something different. And then I also would be curious as to your feedback on whether or not you like to wear a vest or not. That does make you very visible. It would be reflective. It would say media on it. And I've talked to Laura Hammond, the city manager's office, and she said that we do have some funding for that. So if you're interested, just I would like that feedback, please.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Melinda.
I have a quick question for
Sure.
you again. For those of us that have been out, at night, we've seen a radical difference between, the responses that protesters are getting, even from Sunday night until last night when you guys allowed for protesters to block, major freeway. Why have you guys really scaled back that response, and what are you expecting, this weekend?
So the scaling back of the response is a byproduct of us trying to learn some things from Friday's events through the weekend into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and last night. Really, the scaled back response is kind of a symbiotic relationship between the police and the protesters, and extending a little bit of faith on both sides to see if both sides can behave a little bit differently. One of the things that occurred on Monday night, as our protesters sat in the street on 10th Street by Monroe Park getting ready to march, is an attempt, quite honestly, I just drove down to have a conversation with anybody that's willing to have a conversation with me. And the question was, how do we both achieve safely and peacefully the things that we both want to achieve? Them being heard, them being seen, and us keeping a community safe. And I was met with some they were fairly receptive to that. And I think that dialogue was helpful that night as well. We saw our first night on Monday of being a little bit more organized and a little bit more lawful in their approach to protesting. And so subsequent to that, you saw some other measures of trust extended on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday with the absence of a curfew. And I'm just so very pleased with the people that are coming out to be heard and still are angry and frustrated and very saddened by what happened in Minnesota, that they've had the opportunity to do those things. We've made it a conscious choice to allow them to take over the streets and to create a path for them the best we can. And they've become more organized. They've got people trying to block intersections. They've got people trying to be forward looking to make sure that they're safe as well. But we know that individuals on foot aren't always best capable to do that. So we want to put some resources there. And so we're hopeful that that's what we will see into the future, is that we'll see those continue to happen as long as they're willing to come together and do those things. And it's our job to kind of safely and peacefully be able to facilitate for that for them. These protesters have been nothing short of amazing from time to time. I'd be really remiss if I didn't at least comment on what happened Sunday afternoon after the rally that occurred and started on the courthouse steps, the federal courthouse steps, and moved to Alton Baker Park and then took over our downtown core. The organizers of that worked with us for days before that to try and make sure that would happen peacefully and lawfully. And you think about moving 6,000 or 7,000 people from point A to point B, and then arguably at least 1,000 or more that marched through the streets of downtown while we tried to stay at a distance and give them their space to be heard. I felt like that was a real success for this community in light of what we had just seen with the violence on Friday night. We had a couple of near misses in there, and so I'd like to call out one individual who was, I think, instrumental in avoiding a turning point in that. Isaiah Wagner stepped in to a situation that could have been very, very dangerous and could have become very, very violent. And so I want to just publicly appreciate Isaiah Wagner. I've not met him in person. I would love to thank him in person for being a man of character and a man of courage in a time where others maybe would have not done that. And so there are some real successes that we're celebrating.
Chief,
Couple more questions.
Can you explain EPD's policies and procedures when it comes to neck restraints?
So the policy that was currently in the EPD structure was the policy around the carotid restraint. It's interesting as you look at the vernacular of chokehold. There is, from years ago, there have been two different types of techniques. One that blocks the airway and has a tendency to block the airway, which is truly choking or strangulation, quite frankly. And the other one, which cuts off the carotid blood flow, which allows for the individual to go into a semi-state of consciousness so that you can take them under control. With an executive directive that was signed by me yesterday, we have taken a first step before we have a chance to really review these with our police commission. I've taken the first step of immediately prohibiting officers from using the carotid restraint unless lethal force is justified. And so that's where we stand right now with that policy.
Chief, I had a question. So Friday night, PD didn't really respond to the situation until the businesses had been destroyed and looted. And what was, I guess, the change in strategy from that night to Sunday when some of the protesters standing along Whole Foods were arrested, and then the other munition methods were?
Sure. Thank you for that question. One of the things that occurred, I'm not going to go into the details about, and you've heard me say this openly, that we got caught flat-footed on Friday night. We did not have that on our in any intelligence brief. We didn't have any sense that that was going to be occurring. We did see that group start to gather, and it was fairly small at the time, and we were monitoring from a distance, and that group grew very, very quickly to a size that was unmanageable for the resources that we had on duty. And so we were efforting more resources as that group had a tendency to get a little bit more violent, and we saw what happened on Friday night. Part of our moving into the weekend on Saturday and Sunday, I'd be irresponsible if I didn't at some point plan for Saturday and Sunday looking through the lens of what occurred Friday night, knowing that that type of violence and frustration and hate could manifest itself in such violent behavior for our community and our business community and our downtown core, which is where they were. And so through that lens, we were trying to plan for Saturday night with more resources and Sunday night. And one of the things that we identified in Friday night's lessons learned is that violence had a tendency to erupt and catch fire, no pun intended, because we had a lot of that as well, but became very contagious as the group got larger and larger and larger. And in hindsight, if we would have been able to manage that group size and keep them in smaller individual groups, as opposed to a group of 200 and 300 people with some specific agitators within that group, that we might be more successful in preventing that violence. So part of Saturday and Sunday's strategy was to try and keep the group small, keep them dispersed, not allow for them to come together and maybe feed on that negative energy that we saw Friday night. And so that was part of the strategy for Saturday and Sunday. And then as we learned from Saturday and we learned from Sunday and moving into Monday, you can see how the strategy has changed. Who hasn't asked a question that would like to have a chance to talk?
You answered all of mine.
Okay. I want to be mindful of everybody.
Chief, in the history of Eugene policing, has there ever been anything before the riots and these protests, the week-long worth of protests, to rival this? Have you?
I would have to defer to Captain Klinko. He's been around for 25 years, and he's been in operations for that entire time. So, Eric, maybe you can speak to your experience here in
Absolutely. So the history of protest here in Eugene goes all the way back to the Vietnam War and things that took place on campus. I certainly wasn't here for that, but I understand that there was some violence. There were attempts on the ROTC building on the University of Oregon campus. What I can talk about, I started here in 1996, and we just had the 23-year anniversary of the June 1st, 1997 tree protest where pepper spray was used. And we've had a long history of different types of protests, whether they be campus-inspired riots of the early 2000s and the late 90s, whether they be the anarchist movement of the early 2000s, or whether they be anti-police, MIA marches, and the like. And each of those has, or at least some of them have had violence associated with them, have had damage associated with them. What I do want to say before I go into that is that the vast majority of protests that we have here in Eugene are incredibly peaceful. And most people, we learned almost 20 years ago that we are better served by reaching out to organizers when and if at all possible and trying to make the event safe. And so we continue to try and do that. In terms of the violence that we saw Friday night, I've never seen that here. And like I said, I can only go back to 1996. But the level of damage, the hatred, the vitriol, we've had fires started before. We've had street signs ripped down. The looting, I've never seen that here in Eugene. I've never seen people who probably, if they weren't caught up in the crowd dynamics, wouldn't have ever thought that they would be looting a Starbucks or looting a phone store or going into Jimmy John's. So there is some crowd dynamics that I'm not an expert in, but I do know that there are people who are absolutely always going to be peaceful protesters. And there's a segment that frankly can go either way, and then there's a very small segment that come with the ill intent to cause mayhem. And their goal is to use the anonymity of a big crowd to incite those who are sort of sitting on the fence. And the truth is, like the chief mentioned, the longer a group sits there, the more, you can see the energy of a crowd coming up. And it's a tough decision to make. Do we move now? Do we wait? Are we better served having them here? Do they disperse into the neighborhoods and cause mayhem? But in terms of what we saw Friday night, the hatred, we had an incident where one of our police cars was attacked. The amount of damage, I have not seen that here previously. Perhaps before my time, but not in the last 24 years.
Thanks, Eric.
Indicated that belief was that a lot of these individuals involved were from outside the Eugene-Springfield area. Your curfew arrests have been overwhelmingly from the Eugene-Springfield area, and what was on footage from last Friday was overwhelmingly young white males with skateboards, which we've seen across the country. Is it still your belief that these are outsiders, or are there locals?
Well, I think obviously the statistics have proven that we are dealing with a lot of local individuals. There's no question about that. I think that some of our intelligence that we were gathering, social media, the Northwest Fusion Center, which does our intelligence gathering for our state and around the area, was suggesting many individuals that were traveling up from Roseburg area and down from Portland to participate in those. And we've seen many times in protests in my career, and certainly here in Eugene, where we have these protests and people have a tendency to come in, not care about this community, do what they came to do, and leave. And so I do believe that there is still a significant presence of people that have traveled from the outside area that have come into the town.
Is there a means by which, and I don't want to get into tactics,
Sure.
I'm giving them away to the wrongdoers.
Yeah.
Is there a means by which, through various levels of surveillance or other tactics, to at least gather information as to vehicles coming in and out of the area?
Yeah, that's a great question, James. Where at all possible, when we think about this big pond of individuals, we would love to be able to fish for the right ones and be able to pull them out, to allow for the people that can stay there peacefully and do that. Unfortunately, absent good intelligence and kind of where to look for those, sometimes it's hard. Every once in a while, as we monitor the group dynamics with officers that are in the field trying to get eyes on and identify who that is, we can surgically go in with arrest teams and do that. But keep in mind, with a situation like Friday night, as violent as it was, even if we would have identified a few of those instigators based on the group dynamic, the amount of violence, I made the call to not put officers in harm's way to do that. If you think about the resources it takes to go in with an arrest team of 2 for a single individual, and then the number of officers it would take to surround that arrest team to make sure that they were safe, it was not the right call for me to make that night, to put officers in harm's way. Because when I do something like that, and we go in and we run the risk of a major violent confrontation with people, then we end up hurting people. And we didn't want to end up hurting officers, and we didn't want to end up hurting community members. So that's a call that I made that night. That things can be replaced, buildings can be replaced, glass can be replaced, inventory can be replaced. Human life, it's hard to replace those things, and I did not want to be in that situation. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you guys so much for coming. Great questions. There'll be more information as we move through this. Again, we are really hopeful for another peaceful protest tonight. As always, if people want to plan those things, reaching out to us to make sure that we are in good communication is really, really helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.